Two Liberal MPs are on their way home early from Taiwan on the advice of the federal government. Helena Jazik and Marie-France Lalonde were there as part of a parliamentary delegation, but with Prime Minister Mark Carney heading to China this week, they're cutting their trip short to, quote, avoid confusion with Canada's foreign policy. In response, Conservative foreign affairs critic Michael Chong says two Liberal MPs cutting short a visit to Taiwan because of pressure from government officials is nothing short of kowtowing to Beijing's authoritarianism. Conservative MPs were not asked to return home. We're going to start there with the power panel. We've got Vandana Cotter. She was an advisor to former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Brad Levine is a former national campaign director for the NDP. And here with me in the studio, we've got Kate Harrison. She's a Conservative political analyst. And Rob Russo is the Canada correspondent for The Economist. Good to see you all. Vandana, what do you make of this move? How does the presence of Ms. Jazik and Ms. Lalonde in Taiwan complicate things for the Prime Minister in Beijing?
Well, I don't think their communications was the best done here. I will say I wouldn't read too much into the decision. I would say what it is that Canada has to speak with one voice, and anything that is different from that. So the Prime Minister goes to China, but then someone's going to ask, what about your two MPs in Taiwan right now? It distracts the message. And the government of Canada has to speak with one voice right now. And I think that is actually the real thing at hand. And from political operations perspective, you want the focus to be on what the communication of the Prime Minister is doing, not what other MPs are doing. A lot of these trips, just to give background, are like state-sponsored. So they take MPs who are not parliamentary secretaries or ministers to these trips. But I don't necessarily always feel like they add necessarily value, but it doesn't show a change in our position on Taiwan or in China that hasn't changed under Harper, Trudeau, or Mr. Carney.
But just on that, Vandana, there's still going to be Canadian members of Parliament there, right? The Conservatives who are there are not coming home. And I know we draw a sharp distinction here. Don't know if they do in mainland China. It feels like they don't. So, like, you know, isn't any MP there going to present the same challenge, Liberal or not?
I don't think it's any MP. I think it would just definitely be their Liberal leader. So it is the Prime Minister, but it's the same party. So I think even from a China perspective or anyone's perspective, it will be seen as different. Because he's the Prime Minister, again, they have to speak with one voice. But I don't think there'll be confusion if there are other MPs there. They don't take direction for the Prime Minister necessarily in the same way. It is not the leader of their party. So I don't think they'll be seen in the same way.
Kate, how do you see it?
The confusion that's being created is by calling the government MPs back from the trip. If the presence of government MPs in Taiwan is so troubling to China that would derail an entire conversation around the future trading relationship, then it begs the question whether or not there was much materially to be gained from this trip at all, or really the strength of what that partnership might look like.
The China trip or the Taiwan trip?
The China trip. Okay. So if we are okay to ostensibly optically weaken our support for Taiwan and pulling back MPs from presence on the Taiwan trip because it might create confusion for China, what message does that send about our foreign policy position on Taiwan? I do not think that it is just about mixed communications. I think that because of the demonstrated activity in the South China Sea by China in recent months, which Canada and other countries have condemned, the decision to pull back government members from an existing trip in Taiwan speaks volumes about where our foreign policy may go. And I think that it is possible for Canada to walk and chew gum at the same time. You can maintain support for a democratic ally in Taiwan while also advancing trade talks. And if that's not the case for China, then how serious were we about actually materially benefiting from a renewed trade relationship and trade talks?
Does it water down Canada's support for Taiwan, or does it avoid unnecessary potential provocation with China?
I think
that seems to be the calibration. I don't know.
When we are in an environment where we are talking about democratic nations being invaded on a regular basis, pick the nation of choice.
That's a good point.
It is hypocritical to be concerned about the hypothetical U.S. invasion of Greenland and not extremely critical of any decision by Canada to look at pulling back support for Taiwan at this time. Yeah,
Brad, we are talking a little bit too frequently about democracies getting invaded. But what are your thoughts on this move of the early return of the Liberal MPs?
Well, I think it's another recent example whereby the Prime Minister's clarity about Canada's positioning on the global stage is interrupted or let's say mixed up or lacking in clarity due to trade issues taking front and center. Just a number of days ago, his statement on America taking out Maduro in Venezuela was very weak. because he had one eye on the Kuzma renegotiations later this year. And then here we have, in order not to offend China, we're pulling 2 Liberal MPs off of a trip to Taiwan. What signal does that send about Canada's support for Taiwan? He would rather have that gesture, and that the Chinese government recognize that gesture, that we're pulling out 2 government sitting caucus MPs from Taiwan as a gesture of goodwill in order for the trade conversation to go well. So it's just I think another example. This is second in 2 weeks where trade is trumping the clarity with which Canada is speaking on the global stage.
Rob, I hadn't considered it the way Brad just described it, as a gesture, right? Rather than risk mitigation, it's maybe something, as he sees it, designed to appease Beijing. I mean, it speaks to the complexity of this whole trip and the various components to it.
I think it's also a reflection of the reality that Canada has guardrails in terms of its relationship with China. China clearly has guardrails in terms of its relationship with Canada, and when it comes to human rights, when it comes to Taiwan, those guardrails are very, very narrow for Canada. It also, I think, reflects the fact that this is just the beginning of a reset in the relationship between the 2 countries, and that is embryonic and remains fragile. If they have to bring these 2 people back, it is very fragile. The last thing I would say is I'm not sure. I'm not a communications person. I'm a scribbler and sometimes a babbler. But it would seem to me to be counterproductive in that it will almost certainly prompt questions about this when Mr. Carney is in China. And if it doesn't, it should. It will prompt questions about Mr. Chalil. It will prompt questions about Jimmy Lai. And I'm not sure that those are the kinds of questions that the Prime Minister would want to answer when he's standing next to Xi Jinping.
Do you think, Rob, like I've never gone on a trip to China.
I'm about to go for the first time.
Well, there you go. But do you feel this is enough? I mean, if Helena Jaczek and Marie-France Lalonde are the thing that tips it with China, you know what I mean? Just their presence in the region. I mean, is this an overreaction to draw them back? I mean, what's your sense?
I think it's a reflection of the reality that we are thawing out. I wouldn't call it a warm-up. It's a reflection that we've been in a deep freeze and we're still thawing out. And I think, given the Prime Minister going, given the fact that now it seems Scott Moe is going to be with him, there is going to be some progress. And they are, I'm sure, quite nervous about that progress being derailed. I think that's what it reflects, but it's really a reflection of just how fragile the relationship still is.
Vandana, we are increasingly in this era of intransigent superpowers, right? And you're seeing these compromises, rhetorically and otherwise, being made by the middle powers, and Canada obviously caught between the economic might of China and the United States is no exception in that. I mean, but where does this go just in general on foreign policy for a middle power like Canada that historically has liked to punch above its weight, but right now is getting squeezed in a lot of directions?
The focus on Canada's foreign policy on what's best for Canada, and that really means what's best for Canada economically. I think it means we'll connect and share our values simply by being Canada. But I do think when it comes to cases like whether it's canola or the other human rights issues that were raised, connecting with that country is better than not having any connection at all. You're more likely to move further with that if you have something in common where you may not make, those conversations may not make whatever statements come out, but it could be talked in the back rooms. And I've seen that and experienced that firsthand where sometimes that's the best place for that type of diplomacy. But at this moment, what Canada's going to do is focus on what is going to be best for Canada's economy and what's best for Canadian jobs and protecting Canadian jobs, given that there are stuck in a number of strange global spheres. We have China and the United States, but a partner that cannot be relied upon. So we have to find other options. And that may mean that the way we talk about human rights might just become, it doesn't mean it's quieter, but it may not be the first statement out there. It might just have to stay in the back rooms.
So Brad, how do you calibrate all of that, right? Because this is an ongoing evolution, to use a word, with how we deal with the United States as a country. The things you may want to say that could be cathartic and the things you end up saying because you think they're more strategic. I mean, how do you balance this without just looking like you kind of don't have any values other than the trade value?
That's right. I think within the span of the last 13, 14 months, Canada has gone from a values-based foreign policy where we go around the globe and we talk about the values, whether with our allies that we share or the values that we have in contrast with even some friends across the globe. That was the Trudeau model. The Carney model, to Vanita's point, is jobs and the economy first. The values, and this is will be interesting to see how Canadians react with everything that's going on with the trade irritants coming out of Washington and what's going on in the world stage overall. So much uncertainty, so much troubling incidences around the globe. I think Canada is going to be looking a little bit more insular to fix some of the things that we need to in this country, find new partners. But I think that the standards, it'll be interesting to see what Canadians feel about the standards with whom we deal. That is the notion of doing trade with China, the notion of doing trade with India, even though there are human rights violations and really, close to home human rights violations in the case of India here in British Columbia. We'll see if those, if Carney is given the ability to go off and say that we're going to deal with people with whom we may not have dealt with in the past. You saw what he was doing in the Middle East, in Saudi Arabia, in other Middle Eastern countries where, under Trudeau, we had no relationships with these countries. And Carney's trying to open them up. In fact, after China, he's going to the Middle East. So we see that. So values are going to take a backseat to the economic necessities of Canadians in terms of what our foreign policy outlook will be in the near term. Yeah,
and we have an interview with the Indian High Commissioner to Canada coming up in the next hour of the show. Kate, last word on this about this balancing act of values and value that we're kind of seeing on display with the China trade.
I think it's important to keep in mind that the human rights abuses that occur with China do not stop at Chinese borders. China and Russia, according to the NORAD commander, are regularly more actively buzzing our north. China has interfered in Canadian elections. There is more to be considered here than the plight of the Uyghurs, though that is also something that we should be preoccupied with. The reality is that we would not be entertaining this conversation with China if the Prime Minister had actually followed through on his promise to deliver a new economic and security partnership with the United States. Now we're backed into a corner of having friends in China and Qatar because we failed to secure the most important trade relationship that we have.
Right. Well, the U.S. plays a role in that too, though, Kate. Let's be fair.
How do we think the U.S. is going to respond to pulling back from Taiwan? How do we think that might look to the U.S.?
With Donald Trump, I'm not going to predict anything because I have no idea.
I don't think it'll be viewed favorably.